Hey guys, so just kind of saying straight up with you guys, there's going to be a lot I'm going to cover in this episode review. So if it turns out like I get tongue-tied, trust me, it's intentional in some ways. Um, but right out of the gate, the episode introduces us to a new character, Zhao Mei, who going forward you're gonna find kind of operates as the series' self-inserted narrator. But the obvious thing to pay attention to with her introduction is when she says outright not to think too hard about the 20,000 year time jump, and that time holds no meaning in this story. And oh boy, here's the irony. Even though she says not to think too hard about it, if you read between the lines of her dialogue, then you're really gonna then this is one of those times where you pretty much it's one of those things where, despite what Xiaomei says, you pretty much kind of need to keep what she also says locked away in your mind for future reference, because even though she is reaffirming what I had said about time not being linear, if you look at the subtext, she's also outright saying time can be completely subverted. And we pretty much already got a glimpse of that from the reveal of Norma, that Norma and how they're how the Norma that Shiki and Rebecca are on is like from 50 years in the past. But from here onward, like, it's one of those things where the level of detail put into just this very single aspect of the story, this concept of time, is actually kind of amazing and really made me it wasn't until I kind of the series really started re-exploring this that it really made me rethink my stance on Mashima as a creator and an artist and a writer, because how it's explored actually kind of refines a problematic trope he's used a lot. He used a lot during like the second half of Fairy Tale, and really puts into perspective just how that truly was not reflective of him at his best. Like of course of course the caveat to this is that we won't really start truly exploring this until maybe season 2. But it's like but yeah, it's it's stuff like this that really says that Eden Zero is a lot closer to like Rave Master, like his first work Rave Master, than it is like, or at least the second half of Fairy Tale, frankly. Um, with this episode too, we also get introduced to the main antagonist of this arc, Sabir, and it's gonna be hard to talk about this guy until we reach the final battle climax of this arc. But he's one of the many examples of how for me and how for me revisiting this material, hindsight's a bitch. It really is a fucking bitch when it comes to when it comes to this, because the thing about Sabir nowadays for me is that he's an example of a certain writing philosophy Mashima utilizes throughout this series, which is that already at face value and robotic abuse aside, yeah, we're gonna get into that little chestnut later. Sabir's a little stock, for lack of a better term. Like, he, don't get me wrong, he is a very threatening villain. Again, robotic abuse, but but the thing is, he's kind of intentionally written that way. He is written as a stock character because 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 again, it's hard to explain without giving away spoilers, but you'll find going forward that the series does tend to write certain antagonists kind of one note initially, but when they do get reintroduced or come back into the plot in some way, that's where you start to learn more about them. When you get down to it, it's really like the blank slate method of character writing. They pretty much may not be all that compelling or interesting at first, but it allows for greater exploration of their character later on that does give a different perspective to their actions when you first meet them. And Sabir is only the first of many examples of this. And to that point, I do also kind of find it hilarious how Weiss in the future or present or whatnot in X 492 has the complete opposite ideals to what he was like in the past, while still but his while at the same time his past version still kind of shows glimmers of the man he would become. So it's kind of hilarious but interesting in that respect. Um, One thing I also really appreciate about this episode that I didn't entirely before is how is basically just how pretty much Rebecca is using. We get little instances in this episode of Rebecca using her knowledge of Professor Weiss's past and the future she knows in order to navigate through a planet that's basically stuck 50 years in the past, which is a clever use of the concept of time in the series in order to push the narrative forward. I mean, it is kind of going by the Back of the Future logic in that sense, but it is something that in retrospect it makes the arc a lot more fun than I remember it being. Like when I first read this arc, I thought it was okay. It was a good it was a good kind of like it was a good transitionary arc, well, pretty much before we get into something else. But it does make this whole adventure on Norma a lot more fun than I remember it being. Um, we also get introduced to a robot in the case that Weiss was carrying, simply known as Pino. And to start out, obviously anyone who's seen the marketing for this series will know that both she and Weiss will inevitably end up joining Shiki and Rebecca on their adventures by the time this arc is over. But Weiss's reaction, I'm sure, more or less reflects everyone who isn't a manga reader watching this, because it was clearly established during the confrontation with Sabir that Weiss stole money from him, but but as we see, money wasn't in it. It was Pino, and the thing is, it's one of those things where, as we clearly established, it's not a continuity error either. Pino's introduction in itself is basically the first instance you'll find of time going in a direction divergent from how it should have initially played out. Like I'm it's kind of again hard to explain without giving away spoilers, but let's just say that pretty much by the pretty much linear logic of time, money was supposed to be in that briefcase, but but again, as we see, Pino was in there instead, and it was, and the thing is, it's not like, but the thing is, it's a little more. The whole thing itself isn't just as simple as like just simple time travel mechanics, and you'll find out why that is later on. But just through us learning that Pino is from the future, let's just say her master is a mutual acquaintance of Shiki's. That's, again, I've probably already said too much just from saying that bit, but yeah, let's just say the whole, like, we're getting into parts of the series where the concepts of time truly aren't linear, and that there are these many different factors to how time works in this world. On a smaller note, I will admit, just in this instance with Pino's introduction, I did prefer her more slimmed down look compared to how she was here in the anime, because the thing is, in the manga, her limbs weren't as bulky, that they were actually kind of like a little more, what's the word, they were a little more, they were a lot more thin, they were a lot more like, they were a lot more just like very fragile looking, you could say. And so in that sense, it pretty much gave her a lot more physical vulnerability, and kind of in that sense it amplified just seeing Sabir's abuse. Like, yeah, like it kind of amplified just the vulnerability of Pino's abuse at Sabir's hands, which, oh boy, yeah, I'm not even gonna front with you guys. Like the abuse that Pino suffered at Sabir's hands in the manga, it was terrible. Don't get me wrong, but just from like the simple act of having voice actors to music to just having all these little details that an anime adds to an experience, it just from hearing Pino like cry out in pain, cry out for help, it adds so much more to that greater feeling of emotional vulnerability to Pino's abuse now. And just being able to hear Sabir's voice and his glee at just constantly abusing Pino, it makes me hate the man even more than I did in the manga. Just for the simple additions that the anime adds to the experience. So, but yeah, like, oh boy, yeah, like I'm not gonna lie, I got a little, I got a little choked up in the manga, but here I was kind of speechless. I was like, holy shit. um, I also like how this episode and frankly the whole series does something I never really appreciated until now, which is how organically the world is built, and it's all done weirdly through Shiki's perspective. Like for example, just in this episode alone, we're placed in a bar with various alien creatures, and naturally this is something we'd expect from a space theme series. But again, because we're viewing it from Shiki's perspective, someone who's been living on Granville his whole life, it comes across as a new experience that also naturally builds upon Norma as what kind of planet it is without the introduction to so many aliens at like being introduced to so many aliens at once coming across as overwhelming or bloated. Because if you enter it kind of follows the logic that if you introduce like so much at one time, it can feel overwhelming. But it's but just for us getting just this simple setup in a bar, it really it allows the bar provides kind of this natural center point in order to help introduce the lifestyle of Norma, and it makes the introduction to these like alien creatures all the more like natural, I think is the best way to put it. Also, through just seeing what kind of planet Norma was 50 years ago and just how scummy and crime ridden it was, is actually it makes me kind of realize just how much of a first narrative step this was to a greater threat much greater threat that we're going to get introduced to in season 2. But yeah, yeah, guys, that's all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe. I'm on Twitter, Analyst, Crunchyroll, and be sure to hit the bell in order to get notifications. Death Knight of Anime, signing off. Later, guys.